here with Revive, and I just am going to do a video for Dan George, who asked me a question on Twitter. Could you do a video on carb cycling / time carbs versus if it fits your macros for cutting / losing fat? So let me just touch on what each of those means, because some people might not know what they mean. So carb cycling is essentially where you have a high day, a medium day and a low day, or however you want to do it through the week. So different days of the week you'll be having different amounts of carbohydrates. So say on days you don't train, you might have low carbohydrates, versus days you do train, you have higher carbohydrates. Normally your fat and protein will stay level. It will just be your carbs that will be changing. As for timed carbs, generally that is more of nutritional timing. And timed carbohydrates, normally you would sandwich your training with carbs, or you might have them in the morning and not have them later in the evening. Say after 6 you might cut them out, or you might just keep your carbs around your workout. So pre-workout and post-workout might just be where you place your carbs. At the end of the day, each day you have the same amount of carbs. You're not essentially changing anything, you're just making sure to put them in a specific place. And then if it fits your macros, is you have a protein target in grams, a carbohydrate target in grams, and a fat target in grams, and you pick foods and you eat them at any time you like during the day, and essentially at the end of the day you hit those macro targets, and there you go. That's if it fits your macros. You choose when you want to eat it. It's your complete preference. What you eat is your preference. All of these is kind of your preference depending what you're going to do. So those are the 3 approaches that you could choose from in this situation. So if I touch on what cutting / losing fat, essentially what you have to do to achieve that goal, essentially you just need to be in a calorie deficit. If your maintenance to keep your BMR and your activity levels and everything, your NEAT and everything that makes up how much energy you burn is 3,000 calories to just maintain your weight, then if you eat less than that, say 2,500, then you're going to be losing weight. That is essentially what you're going to be doing. And to lose fat, I would add that you want to keep your protein high, and you want to be doing resistance training to keep as much lean mass as possible. So now we know what it takes to lose weight, and more essentially fat, because we want to keep our metabolically active lean tissue, muscle tissue that makes us look aesthetic and good. And we know what carb cycling is, and time carbs, and if it fits your macros is. I'm going to talk about which one I prefer, and also which one you might want to choose for yourself. So essentially all 3 approaches are actually if it fits your macros, because essentially if it fits your macros is a set of macros that you hit by the end of the day, and then you choose when you want to hit that. So all 3 are actually if it fits your macros, as many things are. Generally, if it fits your macros means flexible dieting, which means you just, like I said, eat when things suit you best. So that's how you go about it. And then the other 2, carb cycling and timing your carbs, are a bit more specific if it fits your macros approaches. Personally, I'm a massive fan of if it fits your macros and flexible dieting. The reason being is when we look at the studies, the books, the research, I actually have read the nutrition timing book that is out there, and I have been to Alan Aragon's conference that he recently held in the UK, and he completely went over the subject of nutritional timing. And if you look at the recent review by him and Brad Schoenfeld, you see there's a whole topic on timing of protein, about post-workout shakes and the anabolic window and all of that. And it basically comes down to the fact, at the end of the day, if your macros are the same, but you time things a bit differently, your body composition isn't really going to change. It just comes down to the actual macros you have at the end of the day. However, I will touch on the point that if you are in a calorie deficit, which you are when you're in a cut, you might feel better and do better by placing your carbohydrates around your workout. So I would preface that and say, if you are trying to lose fat and you are trying to maintain as much performance during your sessions as possible, then you will want to have some carbohydrates before your session, because your main fuel source when you are working out is carbohydrates. So you don't want to be limiting those by putting them in obtuse places. Generally though, that's, as I said, that's still an if it fits your macros approach. It would just be sensible to place carbohydrates around your workout when you're trying to lose weight, especially when you're trying to achieve and promote sport performance. Carb cycling is an interesting approach and isn't a terrible approach either. I think it just overcomplicates things. I quite like to have a level amount of macros hit each day. I think it's nice to be consistent, and it also it just overcomplicates things in general, in my opinion. It might make easier to have a higher calorie day, say on leg days, and you increase your carbohydrates on those days, and days you don't work out you have lower carbohydrates. Literally, it just comes down to personal preference. One is not necessarily a better approach than the other. It completely depends on the person. Someone might do really well from increasing carbohydrates on one day rather than another day, and someone else might not. So, in conclusion, really, with all of this, all three are if it fits your macros approaches. The way you overall approach it yourself depends on your preference and which one works best for you. For me, I keep my carbohydrates level throughout the week. I don't do anything special. Eventually I might do refeeds, which is a completely different topic, but for losing weight, all three approaches will work so long as you're in a calorie deficit. No one is necessarily better than the other. The one that's best will depend for you. It depends on which you feel best off, which you get the best performance during your sessions and workouts. And best thing to do is to trial. And essentially losing weight is really to do with consistency. If one is, you think you're not going to be able to stick to it, like carb cycling can be a bit of a pain, going through different amounts each day, making sure that when you're on your high carb days you have enough, and on your low carb days you don't go over, then you might not be consistent, and therefore you might not lose as much weight as you want, or you might just give it up. Whereas if it fits your macros, flexible dieting, you might want to just have it when it fits you best. But as I say, you might want to mess around with putting carbohydrates, say like a high sugar carbohydrate around your workout, pre-workout. Just try it, especially when you're in a deficit. You might really see some benefits in your sports performance like that. So like I say, be in a calorie deficit, and it's all down to personal preference. Try each method out, see what works best for you, and go with that. Hope that answers your question. There's no special tricks you can do with carb timing. It just depends on your overall macros at the end of the day. It's all if it fits your macros. Cheers guys, and revive stronger.